next speaker will be Honourable Patrick Brown, Member of Parliament, Canada, who is serving currently his third term in the Parliament. He is the parliamentarian who organised the screening of the Channel 4 video in the Canadian Parliament. He will focus on the Canadian perspective of the Tamil struggle. Over to you, Patrick.
Thank you, and thank you to my friend Mohan for inviting me here today, and it's great to be here with my friend from the Canadian Parliament, Jim Karygiannis, who will be speaking later today. As a Canadian Member of Parliament, I wanted to extend my greetings to all participants here today on this conference on Tamil people's rights. Canadians value freedom, respect for cultural differences, and a commitment to social justice. We are proud of the fact we have a peaceful nation. Sri Lanka is a very important country for Canada. Tamils began immigrating to Canada in the late 1940s, at first only a few hundred, but in the 1980s, thousands chose to make Canada their home, and the numbers have risen since then. As you may know, Canada has the largest Sri Lankan population in the world today, with some 300,000 Canadians living outside of Sri Lanka in Canada, who have made a huge contribution to Canada's prosperity and the success of our model of unity and diversity. As a Member of Parliament, I had the privilege of representing some Tamil Canadians in my riding of the city of Barrie, and people have asked me how come I got so interested in the Tamil struggle. I must have a huge population of Tamils in the riding I represent, and I said, yes, 5. And they said, 5,000? No, just 5. But the story that's been illustrated to me from the family in Barrie, I think, speaks volumes to why we all need to be so engaged in this issue. I met Ranji and Aaron Sureshkumar about 7 years ago, and this family has their roots in the north part of Sri Lanka. And they explained to me about their relatives in the IDP camps. They spoke of the aggression towards their family members in Sri Lanka. They detailed the repression of their families' rights, the intimidation, and the persecution. The story they told me was deplorable. It was heart-wrenching to hear about the enduring conditions that their relatives had to face. They were vivid, violent, and in a word, shocking. Ever since then, I have followed with great concern the plight of the Tamil people. One description of a war crime is a serious violation of the laws applicable in armed conflict giving rise to individual criminal responsibility. I think most of us here today would sadly agree that much of what has occurred in Sri Lanka to families like the Sureshkumars fits that very definition. I believe it is the responsibility of parliamentarians to make it our priority to raise our voice and support every person's fundamental human rights. There continues to be a lack of accountability and reconciliation has yet to take place in Sri Lanka. The victims of the conflict still await justice, and many Tamils still find themselves in desperate situations. Access to amenities curtailed, rights violated, and the lands in the north and east militarized by state security forces. Canada expects Sri Lanka as a Commonwealth member and as someone hoping to be the host of this year's Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings in Colombo in November to demonstrate its full commitment and application of the Commonwealth values and principles regarding human rights, the rule of law and democracy, as reiterated in the organization's recently adopted charter. Our Prime Minister in Canada, Stephen Harper, has said very forcefully that if we do not see progress in terms of human rights, political reconciliation and accountability, that Canada and the Commonwealth should not permit Sri Lanka to be the host of the 2013 meeting. And Canada has said that the lack of progress would lead us to boycott that meeting in the Commonwealth. I think that's an important action. I think it's important that countries that are actively involved in the Commonwealth use our influence and tools within the Commonwealth to highlight what has happened in Sri Lanka, and to allow a country like Sri Lanka to host the Commonwealth would certainly allow them to continue as if nothing happened. And that's why our Prime Minister has spoke out forcefully about the need for us to be very critical of Sri Lanka's attempt to host the Commonwealth. Canada is concerned that the issue of accountability has not been adequately addressed by the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission report. In his November 15, 2012 statement welcoming the United Nations Secretary General's Internal Review panel report on Sri Lanka, our Foreign Minister, John Baird, referenced the litany of human rights violations endured by the Sri Lankan people and detailed in the report and expressed regret the government of Sri Lanka continues to fail victims and survivors alike. So it's not only our Prime Minister that has spoke out in favour of the Tamil people, but it's our Foreign Minister who has done it both at the Commonwealth and at the United Nations. In 2012, a series of high-level Canadian visits by parliamentarians provided valuable insight on developments in Sri Lanka and opportunities to engage the government of Sri Lanka on Canada's concerns. Most recently, our Immigration Minister Jason Kenney went to Sri Lanka in January of 2013 to press the Sri Lankan government for further action on human rights, political reconciliation and accountability, and our national concern that this is not happening at all in Sri Lanka. Canada continues to urge Sri Lanka to work with the United Nations Human Rights Council to implement the provisions contained in last year's procedural resolution, which Canada strongly supported and spoke in favour of. We look forward to the important dialogue on the report of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights on Sri Lanka at the upcoming Human Rights Council in March. I was personally troubled to learn of the attack in Sri Lanka last December, the editor of a Tamil-language daily newspaper in the northern city of Jaffna. I actually spoke about this in the Canadian Parliament because it goes to show that for those that are concerned that the human rights abuses continue, this is an example and evidence that the plight of the Tamil people is still a huge concern even today. The oppression of human rights hasn't been curtailed. In this case, with the Tamil language daily newspaper, I spoke in our parliament about an individual who was being severely beaten with iron bars. The man was fighting for his life in an intensive care unit. Some reports said the police carried out this very beating. Tragically, there has been at least 4 murders of journalists in Sri Lanka since 2008. This type of blatant disregard for peaceful protest is not part of any stable democracy and should not be ignored by the international community. Journalists from around the world have been sounding the alarm on the Sri Lankan situation, and I would like to share with you that Canadian newspapers have been doing that as well. I'm proud that our Canadian media have been running some excellent articles about the plight of the Tamil people. The Global Mail, our national newspaper, ran a story that called the UN's grave failure in Sri Lanka to act, and Francis Harrison, a former BBC correspondent, has been given certainly a large place in the Global Mail to write about the infamous white flag incident, the killing of a group of 40 Tamil political leaders. The National Post, Stuart Bell, another national newspaper, was given ink to write about Sri Lankan army deserter who gave a rare insider's account into the government's forces torturing civilians. And I thought his writing was very powerful. We've also seen other headlines talk about Canada urging to probe Sri Lanka on war crimes. The slaying of Tamil Canadians underscores ethnic violence in Sri Lanka. There has been dozens and dozens of articles in Canadian newspapers to highlight the challenges that we see in Sri Lanka. I know our Prime Minister also spoke very forcefully about the dismissal of the Sri Lankan Chief Justice. Our Foreign Minister also spoke about that and gave an extensive statement about this very disturbing trend. I realize that my time is up, and so I just wanted to say in closing, I submit to you today that the internal mechanism to bring any accountability in Sri Lanka has thus far failed. Since the state has shunned its responsibility to protect its population from mass atrocities and the international community's pleas have gone unanswered, I believe we have reached the point where the UN's responsibility to protect the third pillar applies. Moving forward, the international community has a responsibility to intervene, employing a more proactive measure, and I'm happy that the Canadian Parliament and our Canadian Prime Minister and our Canadian Foreign Minister continue to speak very forcefully in the Commonwealth and the UN about the plight of the Tamil people, and it's great to be with you here today.